Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are so excited to host you for our session on modernizing API infrastructure. This session is going to focus on 5 custodial data aggregation best practices that are helping organizations drive WealthTech innovation. So I wanted to quickly start off by going through the agenda for today's session and a couple of housekeeping items before we get started on content. So the first portion of the presentation will focus on sort of pitfalls around data aggregation and data quality and the most common challenges that our team is seeing companies encounter. After that, we'll go into some thoughts around evaluation of data quality and some things to keep in mind when it comes to maybe current data sources or feeds that are available to you. After that, we'll move into talking a little bit more about pre-integrated custodial and market data and what are the implications of that for businesses and how and some use cases of how companies are putting that into practice for their WealthTech. After that, we'll walk through sort of a hypothetical implementation process of what it looks like for organizations that are wanting or ready to overhaul their current infrastructure and move to a more modernized API first approach for data feeds and aggregation. After that, we'll touch on the ROI process. What are some of the most common challenges we see companies facing there, and then providing some examples of easy to use APIs that can increase automation amongst those processes. And lastly, I'm very excited that we do have time for a live question and answer session. So because we will have that Q&A session, I definitely encourage everyone along the call to use the questions panel, little tab in your control panel there on the right-hand side. You can submit questions at any point during the call, and we'll basically save all those for the end of the presentation when we have that Q&A session with our panelist experts. So excited to get to those questions. And just a friendly reminder that the session today is being recorded, and we will be delivering a copy of this to your inbox post-webinar. So without further ado, I am excited to introduce our panelists for today's call. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Eric, VP of Strategy with Bridge FT. Eric, would you tell the group a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you, Carolyn. So my name is Eric Siegfried, and at Bridge, I'm responsible for the strategy, really the API strategy across Bridge, working closely with clients and our engineers, to bring a lot of the services and APIs that we deliver. Prior to working with Bridge, I spent about 20 plus years. I was a technical co-founder of SciVantage, and there I was responsible for all of product engineering, working specifically to bring custodial data, both intraday and previous day, out through self-directed and advised platforms.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. Super excited to have you on today's call. We're going to cover some great stuff shortly here. So also excited to welcome Gunnar, Senior Manager of Customer Success at Bridge FT. Gunnar, would you tell the group a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my background's not quite as extensive and awesome as Eric's, but I've got about the past 10 years or so in experience with serving clients in different capacities. And here at Bridge, I work heavily with the implementation team as well as this client support team. So production support as well as walking through clients with the implementation, which is what I'll be covering today.
Great, thanks so much, Gunnar. Super excited. Awesome. So then we will go ahead and start diving into the content. We're going to start by talking about those common challenges and pitfalls that we're seeing companies encountering. So Eric, if you'll take it away.
Clients that are looking to build applications, specifically for advisors, and to some degree within the broker-dealer space, looking to get sort of multi-account, multi-custodial data from all the various custodians, from whether it's Schwab, Fidelity, Pershing, etc. Some of the challenges are, getting that data comes in sort of two forms. You can get it direct, what I'll call direct from source, which would be directly from the custodian, or you can go out to other aggregators that use a variety of techniques. They might get it directly from source. They also might do screen scraping and things like that. And so some of the challenges are, depending upon where you're getting it, you've got to find ways of both transporting that data and dealing with the various ways of transporting it. For example, some of the custodians will deliver via FTP, right? But then you have to deal with, is it FTP push? Is it FTP pull? And both of those, you have to develop solutions to handle those. Some custodians deliver things through another file transfer protocol called NDM. So there's another thing you have to contend with. Some of these larger custodians, and again, also depending upon the size of your own organization, NDM can be a little bit more complicated. It requires some hardware, might require certain lines to be put in place. So there's a lot of technology that you have to contend with as you bring each individual custodian on and understand their different ways of delivering that data. So that's just even to get your hands on the files, right? Then you've got to deal with the file formats, right? So the different file layouts, and whether they're coming off the mainframe, are they comma delimited, are they fixed width, writing parsers, right? And all of this is technically possible, obviously, but it's the nuances, right? Just to bring on each additional custodian, and so that becomes this becomes like a full-time gig just to bring data in. You haven't even gotten to the point of building your application yet, right? Then once you get within that, there's the quality of that data, right? So the challenge is how do you handle that data ingestion at scale? So some of the classic things we'll see are clients that will say, well, we already are getting files from Schwab. They start with Schwab for their first set of advisors. They're trying to bring on some new advisors into their platform and realize that these advisors, custody data at Fidelity. So now you try to go get the Fidelity files, but your previous implementation has been very Schwab driven. And so now you've got a lot of code to change this. Sort of how do I bring this on at scale and find a repeatable process to continue to bring new custodians on board in a streamlined fashion. And the reality is, this is not really, the bread and butter of our clients. They really want to be building applications for their advisor. So this is really about, you have to build all these utilities just to get to the point of building your application. So again, there's a lot of challenges within this just to get your hands on the data. And ultimately, you don't have a process to efficiently and timely bring on new custodian feeds. Each one becomes sort of both a capital and labor intensive process, right? So that's just even to get your hands on the data, right? So Karen, I think we can probably move to the next slide, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the next section, if we can kind of go through some of your thoughts, Eric, around the evaluation of data quality.
Right. So getting past those first set of pitfalls, as I just mentioned, just getting the data into in-house, right? Now there's going through and looking at the quality of that data. Custodians will give you, again, if we just use positions as an example, you get positions from one custodian, you get positions from another custodian. Now you may get balances from one, but you don't get balances from the other. So as you're trying to aggregate this data and normalize it and bring it up to some sort of common baseline, you're not necessarily getting all the same parts. So then you're faced with challenges for the custodian that doesn't give me balances. How do I get them? Well, one solution could be you could roll up the positions on an account, and that can give you sort of the securities balance, but yet you'd still be missing the cash balance, right? So there's a lot of little challenges in how you'll sort of bring everything up to some common baseline, and knowing that there still might be some gaps for custodians that just don't report things. Likewise, you might get lots from one custodian, but you don't get the lots from the other custodian. So you'll have to deal with and contend with how you're going to handle that. So a lot of the traditional aggregators, they're just going to give you the files as is, right? It's up to you to figure out how to add the extra value, but take that value and bring it across all of your custodians. Again, back to normalizing to a baseline. Another big challenge. One of the things that you'll find if you go, and this is just when you're dealing with sort of direct from source or some of the aggregators that will aggregate files and give them to you, but another common source that we'll see clients using are so-called aggregators that will screen scrape sites, right? So they'll go after other online portals, scraping the data, putting it into files, or maybe in an API and delivering it to you. The challenge with that is you really can't get depth. They can only get at what's on the screen, as opposed to the full complement of everything you can get from a custodian. So for example, you'll get sort of the core data of positions, maybe you'll get some balances, some transactions, But on an account can be associated with many persons, right? You've got beneficiaries, you've got primary and secondary holders, you've got trustees, power of attorneys. There's a lot of different types of person entities that can be related to an account, but that's not the kind of stuff that you'll typically get off of a screen scraper, or even from all the custodians, right? So that's sort of how you reach in deeply and get the related persons, RMD data, beneficiaries, and more. So those are the things that from traditional aggregators and screen scrapers you'll have to contend with, as opposed to going direct to source to the custodian. So data quality. So I sort of sum this up as there's breadth of data across the custodians and getting that in a scalable, efficient manner. Then there's the depth of data and the quality.
Got it. Thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate you going through that. In the next section, I think it'll be really helpful for us to go through some more details around the types of data available to businesses and some use cases that you're seeing companies put those into practice.
Sure. So taking everything that I just said, right, and these are a lot of the things that we do here at Bridge of handling breadth and depth, right? And once we've brought that in, processed all of that, right, making that available through a common set of APIs to our clients. So the benefit there is they want to get started building applications, not necessarily worrying about how do I get the data, right, and deal with all the challenges I just mentioned. So by having a common API, for example, positions, right, this is the definition of all the position fields. You can get that regardless of whether the data came from Schwab, came from Fidelity, came from NFS, or any other custodian, right? If you've got your advisor data flowing into us from the custodians, we can process that, normalize that, and put that on the API. You write to that once, you can now go off and build your applications, right? And as you onboard more advisors from other custodians, the data is just going to flow right through. But if you take that one step further, when you're thinking about the type of applications you have to build, right? You might have to build a positions page, but you want to show you're showing previous day positions, but you may want to reprice those positions using an intraday quote. You may want to decorate those position data and show your end users things like the sectors or some additional market data based information for those positions. So the challenge you'll have is going and finding a market data provider. You've got positions perhaps coming off of the Bridge API, but you've got to go get market data, bring those two data sets together, process them, merge them, and show that stuff. One of the benefits of having sort of pre-integrated APIs, for example, within Bridge, we also have pre-integrated market data APIs. So you could call positions, and the response you get back already has the repriced market value baked into it. It might already have fields in there that represent, hey, here's the sector in class, right? Or some additional market data based fields, all baked in. So really, you can go right to developing, and that just accelerates your time to market by using custodial data pre-integrated with market data, as well as some other types of data that we make available in our marketplace. Again, all trying to put you in a position of spend time building the application, not so much time worrying about how you're getting your hands on quality data. This is trade-ready data. It's AI-ready data, and what do you need to do AI? You need really good, clean data, right? So that's some of the advantages of using pre-integrated custodial APIs. And I actually got ahead of myself on the slide and talked through these two use cases. This is exactly what I just mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's great. We got a little out of ourselves. It's perfect.
I get excited.
You don't want to cover up on this stuff, Eric?
Yeah, but I'm gonna dip into it a little bit more. So as a baseline of APIs that can deliver transactions, positions, balances, lots, both realized and unrealized. Some of the other things that we can do on top of that, because once you have this data, you might use it for for display purposes of showing your client's book of business. But you've got some other types of services or other types of information you need, whether it's insights and analytics, billing engines, running billing reports, performance calculations. Those are all things you can do with the data that comes off our APIs. Tax loss harvesting or some other use cases a lot of our clients do. But at the same time, you may want to build those things yourself, and you can with those APIs. But again, there's always the question of, but you may want that functionality, but you don't necessarily want to build it, right? We've got some higher order services that sit on top that allow us to do, so we can do billing and reporting for you, fee schedules, performance calculation, performance reports, client reports, all off the same APIs, again, using that same clean data. So these are a lot of things that somebody could build, with the data themselves, or your time to market, right? You can just use them right off the APIs.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate you going through that. I'm really excited the next portion of the presentation goes through implementation, because I think everything we've talked about so far is really like, wow, this is great, but how does this actually come to fruition, and how do you put this into practice at your own organization? And Gunnar on the call today is going to really go through what that process would look like, essentially in detail for organizations that are interested in getting started. So Gunnar, if you could kind of kick us off, that'd be great.
Yeah, perfect. So at Bridge, we've identified kind of 4 different phases to integrate to our APIs, and we call it the WealthTech API integration journey. But as we bring on a new client, these are the steps that we take and we found it to be the most seamless, and also to set the client up for success with our APIs most effectively. So I'll go through these quick in an overview, and then I'll go through in a little more detail. But phase 1, this is more of like a setup phase where we want to set up and get the clients access to our APIs as soon as possible, usually 2 to 5 business days. Once that's done, phase 2, this is more of like an educational phase where we want to get clients educated on our core APIs. We have a few core APIs, as well as maybe any unique APIs. Every client has a different unique use case, so we want to make sure that if there's APIs that are applicable, we want to make sure to go through those, and then the ROI process as well. And then that puts us into phase 3. So all in all, about 17 to 20 days to get past phase 2, phase 1 and 2. And then in phase 3 is the build phase. So this is where the clients are building to our APIs. It's more client dependent on the time frame. It could take we've seen as low as a few weeks up to longer than 3 months. It depends how many resources every client kind of has to build out their production application and build out to the APIs. And then finally, once that's complete, we'll transition to go live, and we'll kind of do some final checks to make sure that everything's flowing through, there's no other final questions, and then hand it off to an account manager. But I'll go into a little more detail on each of these steps. We can transition over to the next slide. Perfect. So phase 1, again, like I said, 2 to 5 business days. We've seen it down as low as 1 business day. We do want to have a kickoff meeting, so it is a bit client dependent there. We just want to make sure that everything's set up on the back end and that you get access to the APIs, or our clients are having access to the APIs as soon as possible. So in the kickoff meeting, something important to note is we want to kind of level set with those who are building out to our APIs, because oftentimes the parties that purchased the data aggregator versus those building out to the APIs are maybe not the same exact people. So we want to kind of level set and make sure that there's a clear understanding of kind of what the expectations are, and if there's any additional support that's needed, we can absolutely provide that as well. And I'll go into that in a little more detail. So the main ways we're supporting is through our Slack channel. Is a direct line of communication with our implementation team, our API engineers, throughout the entire implementation. That way, if there's an API call and request that needs to be kind of worked through or has a question on, we can talk through that through a Slack channel. We'll also have our Bridge OT support portal, which is more long-term production support, but detailed requests we can handle through there as well. And then we'll deliver the API credentials, both production and sandbox credentials, to have access to the APIs, and then set up a bi-weekly meeting cadence to just check in and make sure that we're there and available as needed. Ultimately, the goal of phase 1 is to have your first API call, and then we'll provide API documentation, and a simple accounts call is certainly sufficient. So once that's done, there's access to the APIs. We want to transition to phase 2, and that's going to be more about educating the clients. And you can transition to the next slide if you're able to. Perfect. So phase 2, this is it takes a little bit longer, about 10 to 15 business days, and like I said, more of an educational phase where we want to educate the client on our core APIs to make sure that they're equipped for success in building out to our APIs. So the first, our core API is an advisor code API, which allows have access to the data and see the data. You can add or remove advisory codes, so you can add and see the data that you want when you want it. Very important, because if you don't add the advisor codes, then you won't see the data. And then our data availability status API. I know that's a mouthful, but essentially that's to ensure that every morning as we ingest the custodial data, you want to make sure that you're not pulling during that ingestion, and that you're pulling the data when it's ready and accurate. And so that API will let you know, and it breaks it down to into more detail, lots, positions, things of that nature per each custodian. So if if there's multiple custodians that clients are working with, it's nice to be able to see which ones are available, and even further deeper, which areas are available within those custodians. And then finally, we'll talk through some key use case APIs. This is a little more client dependent, where if a certain client has a particular different use case, whatever it may be, and we've built out APIs to kind of facilitate and help with those use cases. And so we'll bring those up as well during phase 2, and then talk through the ROI process a bit as well, which is unique for each custodian. And then we're good to transition to phase 3. This is where the build phase. So we've already gone through the setup, the education, and gone through the APIs. And this is where the clients are building out to the APIs. So 30 to 90 business days is typically what we see. We've seen it as short as 3 weeks. It really is dependent on the resources that are available and things of that nature. We have that bi-weekly check-in meetings that we set up, and it's nice to be able to connect over Zoom. Sometimes through Slack support, that's very helpful, but you may want to share your screen and kind of talk through some issues a little easier in person. Even though there's a bi-weekly check-in meeting, if we have certain clients that maybe aren't familiar with the industry, or maybe need a little more help and guidance on whether it's building out their application or building out the APIs, whatever the case is, we have multiple members of our team that are willing to assist with whatever the case may be. And we found it helpful to be able to try to provide that support, whether it be custodial information or just industry knowledge in general, on top of the API support. So then we'll provide support on detailed requests through our support portal. And then as we're getting towards the end of phase 3, towards launch, certain clients, you want to make sure we set them up for success as best as possible. And so we have an awesome marketing team, and they're, if interested, we can pair and partner up with a client and provide some communication to when they do go live, to kind of help increase exposure and make it as successful as possible. And then we're kick off to phase 4. And this is a much quicker, 5 to 10 business days. It is a bit client dependent, but we'll just do a final checkout to make sure that our 2 core APIs are in production. There's no issues there. We want to walk through, kind of hold the hand to make sure that the first ROI comes through and the data is flowing, and just make sure there's no final questions there. And then we'll transition off of the Slack channel to our full-time production support portal, and then hand it off to the account manager. So that covers the implementation journey in the 4 phases. And on the next slide, we'll just kind of look at the whole picture once more. And just to kind of highlight that getting to access to the APIs, I think is really important to be able to start building out and going to market as soon as possible. And for us, the general time frame that we see is about 17 to 20 business days getting to that phase 3 point. But yeah, next I'll talk through the ROI process.
Gunnar,
Yeah,
I think it's just definitely worth noting, and thanks so much for going through that. I think that was a really great overview. This is a very speedy process, right? Compared to probably the process that a lot of companies might have worked through before or had in mind. So I think that's probably a great takeaway here, is just how simple and easy it is, for companies to get up and running by overhauling to a modern API infrastructure. So just wanted to kind of drive that home, just because, when it's laid out like this, it's just so stark to see how simple it can be. So thanks so much for going through that. And I do think this is the perfect time to talk through the ROI process and some of the challenges you're seeing companies encounter with that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, we've had some clients, you go through the full implementation, phase 1 through 4, in about a month and a half. So yeah, definitely can be done very, very quickly and efficiently. Yeah, so I'll talk through the ROI process just a bit, some of the top challenges that we've seen. And then as some APIs that we've deployed to kind of assist and facilitate with that. So first that we see is that it's very advisor dependent. So it's not something that we can control necessarily. generally speaking, or the client. It's usually on the data authorizer or advisor. And we want to make sure that they have, every custodian's a bit different too in their process and what they require. So you want to make sure that all the data is there, all the different parties that need to be involved, and the line of communication is done correctly. And then also you want to follow up with the advisor to make sure it gets done. And so that's kind of what we've seen as the weak link in the chain. There's also a potential for custodian delays, whatever the case is, like with the TD to Schwab merger. Schwab was delayed, and whether there's a delay for any custodian or an issue, they may or may not communicate with the advisor, and oftentimes don't communicate with any other third parties. So there's just kind of some unknowns and some waiting period there. So what we've done to try to facilitate that process and make it a little smoother, you can transition to the next slide, please, is two APIs. So first is our advisor code API, which it's an easy to deploy API out of the box, and it saves time in the sense that you can preemptively map those advisor codes. So let's say I was an advisor and I kicked off a ROI or release of information with Schwab. You can map that advisor code that I'm looking to have sent over to Bridge FT preemptively to the production application. That way, the same day that the data flows through, you'll automatically have access to it and be seeing it through the APIs. And then next, we also have automated the ROI request for various custodians. So again, like I mentioned, there's a lot of information that custodians require, and the advisor may or may not know of all the different nuances or different pieces of information that the custodian requires, depending on the different custodian. And so we facilitate that messaging through an API, which ensures that all the parties that need to be communicated with for each custodian are included, as well as all the different data elements that need to be there are also there. And it ultimately allows the ROI to be completed quite a bit faster. But yeah, that summarizes the ROI piece. And
well, yeah. Thanks so much, Gunnar, for going through that. I think this is super relevant because this is a big area of impact that we're seeing. Companies can make a lot of improvements amongst this process. So really appreciate you going through that. Thank you so much. We have reached the question and answer portion of the call. We haven't had any questions come in quite yet, but Eric, I think there was one more thing I wanted to have you talk through. So I thought maybe we could flip to that and then give people a couple minutes if they want to enter their questions.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is basically a number of clients that have leveraged the WealthTech API at Bridge, and it ranges, from from TAMPs to trust organizations to just individual advisory firms. All of them in one way or another. Actually, also some indexing platforms. We've got some clients that have created two-sided marketplaces, bridging customers looking for advisors. To me, it's almost like the dating service, but all leveraging the Bridge APIs. Even to larger multi-network partners like Dynasty. So there have been some common use cases among them, but some of these firms have actually at one point already had direct to custodian implementations where they're bringing the data in, but it just became such an expensive proposition for all the shortcomings I talked about earlier, right? Managing that and not spending time building the application. So if there's somebody else to manage that, push that off and get back to building the application. Some of these are startups, some of these are large enterprise organizations. As Gunnar was mentioning in the implementation process, we've had some of these firms during the sales process. We typically hand out sandbox access so they can actually play with the API and try it as part of their decision-making process. And we've had firms during that time period build a complete POC. So by the time they actually came on board with us, they were already well through phase 1, 2, and 3 and ready to just go live. And we just started doing the ROI. So it's been tremendously beneficial. And this is just a sample of a lot of the clients that are currently leveraging this platform.
Yeah, Eric, and I really like that you brought up the developer sandbox, because I do think that's something great for people to be aware of. So I think maybe that's a good takeaway. I guess we don't have any questions, so that means we were very thorough in our presentation today. I did want to say, if anyone kind of marinates on what we talked about today and does end up having questions, I did send out an email prior to the call. Feel free to respond to that email with any questions that kind of piqued your interest. But if if anyone is interested in gaining access to the developer sandbox and sort of just getting into the API and starting to play around with it, we're more than happy to do that. I will be sending a follow-up call with a recording of today's session, so feel free to respond to that email with any interest you have. And I also wanted to make sure that I direct everyone to our website, www.bridgeft.com. You can find a lot more information on there about the API. You can also access our developer recipes. Our full API documentation is also available on there, so I definitely encourage everyone to check that out. And I wanted to sort of finish by thanking everyone that joined us on today's call. We were really excited to share this content with everyone. And also a huge thank you to Gunnar and Eric for sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you guys so very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.